Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, my name is Greg. I just want to talk to you about a couple things. I was just thinking about, like, last time I had a video, I was talking about heaven. I got my little checklist here. I was talking about heaven, and this is pretty much, I wanted to do another flat earth video, and so I thought, let me do a quick one, and not too long, not too long. So what I'll do is just pretty much I'll share with you a couple things. From last time I presented my flat earth video, I was talking about heaven and about New Jerusalem, and I talked about how the measurement of the city being 1,500 miles as a cube in every direction, in length and width and height as a cube. I talked about how that would be really hard on a curved surface. You know, if every 70 miles or so is supposed to be a curve, or a noticeable curve, that a 1,500 mile building would actually, jut out and it wouldn't rest flat on the ground. So that was one. The next thing was that we talked about heaven, and about how heaven is a wonderful place, and how it's a place where has for Jesus said, "I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, there you may be also." I'll say it again slower so you can hear it. As Jesus said, "I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, there you will be also." And so it's in John chapter 14, verse 1. And he says, also in the same passage, he said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh to the Father except by me." So it's like the only way to get to heaven is through the door. It's Jesus, according to the scriptures, according to the Word of God, which is Jesus. As also we talked about the power of thirds, like 1/3, and how, you have 1/3 of, when you look at the destruction in the Revelation, it talked about how 1/3 of this will be destroyed, 1/3 of that. And so from the point of view of the person who was there watching everything, a third has to be something where, you'd have to know 2/3 in order for it to be correctly a third. For example, if I say this glass is half full or half empty, I have to know that the full glass is present to me. So for somebody to say that the glass is half full, or even a third of the earth will be destroyed, or 2/3 of the earth will be destroyed, that means you have to be able to see all 3/3, the whole thing, in order for you to know what's being destroyed. Anyway, since that time, we've had a lot of things happen. You've had the eclipse, solar eclipse, that was on August 21st of last year, 2017. And that was a really big event. I made a video for that, and I was really excited about that. Another thing, too, we talked about was there's a lunar eclipse, and then we had, we found out proof that there's actually dropping chemtrails into the sky, and we have the barium and aluminum, and that's something there that pretty much many people who were anti-conspiracy theory, who anti-chemtrails and everything, like chemical trails, they were able to find out about that's actually something that's been found to be proven true, that they have been dropping chemicals on us for all these years. Anyway, the next thing too, we also had our first ever Flat Earth conference, and that was it was in November. I wasn't able to attend, unfortunately. I really wanted to go. I really wanted to be part of the whole Flat Earth movement, and to be able to see all the different people who I follow on Facebook and YouTube. And I was sad that I wasn't able to go to it, and hopefully maybe next year I'll be able to do so. The next thing too, I just want to talk to you about a couple of things that been on my mind. And one of the things, I have a couple of friends of mine who are Christians. I'm a Christian. I'm a born-again Christian. I've known Jesus as my Savior since I was 7 years old, and I served in ministry for a number of years, and for at least 10 years in ministry. And I did a thing called street preaching, where we'd go out to Manhattan, and I live here in New York City. And what happens, we'd actually go out and preach in the streets and be able to share and talk to people about Jesus, in the streets, which is really cool because it's an awesome ministry. You go there and meet people and talk to them about, you draw a picture, and pictures on the wall, you draw a little picture. And as you draw pictures, you fill in the blanks, all the details of it. And then what happens is that people, they stop and they listen, and then you give them a pamphlet and you talk to them more, and you get to, share with them, and eventually they give them opportunity to make a decision, or not to decision, make a profession to trust in Jesus as their Savior. So anyway, one of the things that I was talking about was I had a scenario where I was talking to a couple of friends of mine, and usually I post on my Facebook page some things, and I get people to banter back and write me whatever they think, and usually I read it and I respond back to what they're saying. And so one of my friends, he said to me something about, we were going back and forth, and it was about like just Bill Nye, the science guy, and everything like that. And they were saying about how he's not really, he's just a guy really, and he's not like, it's just one of those things where they put him on, they have him because he has the look and the persona a science person, So they get him because he looks good. And so most of science, not saying that this is because just of him, but because of most science, it's kind of one of those things that's wrapped up in looks and appearances and things. It's kind of like, who's got the best sneakers on the block kind of thing. Anyway, so what happens is like, we were talking and we got back and forth in a heated conversation, and sometimes I let people just talk and I hear what they're saying and try to see beyond the lines. So anyway, I'm not going to post or tell who said what, but one of my friends said something, and he says, using the scientific method, can you prove that God exists? And I sat there and I thought about that for like 2 days. I went to work and I said about that and the whole scientific method to prove that God exists. I was like, I'm a storyteller, right? I like to tell stories, and I like to invent stuff and make stuff. I do a lot of my stuff on Blender, and one of the things about Blender that's really cool is that you can make anything. You could pretty much, you start off with a cube, and from there you can make just pretty much anything. And so it's my version of what I'd call digital Legos. When I was a kid, I used to play with Legos all the time, and so now my kids have all my Legos and I've taken them hostage. But when I was a kid, I would have my Legos in pristine condition. I'd have them, all of them, and I had them numbered and counted and everything like that. But what happened was that over the course of time, my kids took advantage of it, and they got all my Legos and they scattered it all over the house, and that's just gone. But later after that, I got into this thing called Blender, and Blender is an animation software, which is really cool. So you get a chance to make stuff, and I really like that, like the whole thing about making things. So one of the things about that, in train of thought, go back to my train of thought, was that, saying about like how to prove God exists through the scientific method, it's like let's say it's trying to describe God in man's terms. It's kind of like trying to say, if you were like an ant and an ant saw a person, an ant can only describe what a person is in ant terms. So an ant, being a bug, would tell other ants, I just saw a giant walking ant who walked on 2 legs, and they looked funny. I mean, I don't. And it's for one ant to try and explain to another ant. So that's like, for us trying to explain God using our scientific method kind of falls into the same kind of category of that. It's like trying to understand a supreme being through our means of, understanding. Well, here's something interesting though. I mean, there's only 2 ways to learn something. Well, there's several ways to learn something, but there's one of the 2 ways that you do learn something is that either you test it yourself and you make it provable by yourself, and or you're told something. It kind of boils down to those 2 things, because what happens is that, either I'm there to prove it and see it, and even when I see it, I'm not sure what I just saw, and then somebody else has to explain it to me, or somebody has to tell it to me flat out, and I have to either believe it or don't believe it. So, for example, now many of the scientists talk about the whole thing with the Big Bang Theory, and about how, we were made from the Big Bang. So what that means is that we were actually, nothing times time becomes everything. So last time I checked, when you take 0 and you multiply it by anything, it still equals 0. But the thing is, like, what happens is that most people, in terms of science, they have this belief system that nothing created everything. So I remember one time I was talking to one of my friends, and I told them this, that they don't have any proof, and they were like, no, this is scientific proof. That they were saying that this is scientific proof that we all came from nothing. Now I would argue that, because according to the scripture, the Bible says in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. I mean, He created the heaven and the earth. So when you look at that, right, from the point of view how God made everything, it explains from the beginning, that's the foundation. In the beginning, God made the heaven and the earth. Then it goes on to explain about the things that He did specifically in terms of creation. He let there be light. He separated the waters above from the waters below with the firmament. Day 2, He said, day 3, He created the fruit trees and the land. Day 4, He created the sun, moon, and stars. Day 5, He created the sea creatures. The 5th day, the sea creatures and the birds of the air. Day 6, He created the land animals, all land animals, insects, bugs, creatures, dinosaurs, and us on the 6th day. And on the 7th day, He rested. And so after that, you have a series of time, we're not sure exactly how long, but then there's a fall where Adam and Eve, sinned against God. God told them not to eat from this tree. and they ate from the tree, they would surely die. And the death he talked about there is not like physical death, but death as in, first separation, and then it's going to be, physical death, and then it's going to be spiritual death. So he explained these things. So that all starts from the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, according to science is always backwards in terms of different things. So if you have, or different backwards in reference to the Bible. So if, for example, you have a situation where it says, okay, you know what, here we have this thing here where God made the first thing he created. The Bible said the Spirit of the Lord hovered over the face of the deep, right? And the earth was without form and void. So it was without form and void. Then he said, let there be light. So all that time there was no form, no anything. Then he said the first thing God created was let there be light. The second thing he created was that he created he separated the waters above from the waters below. So when you have the look of this, it's like, we are encased in water. We have waters above, and then there's water below, and there's something that separates us from the waters above and water below. So, according to, if you look in the Roman Catholic Bible, it says the word dome. If you look at, according to the scriptures, it says, he made an expanse. He said the vault, and for King James, it says, he created the firmament. And the firmament is, he created a structure, and then he put us all up inside that structure. So we're all inside that little domey thingy, right? So what makes me think about how interesting this is because I started thinking about, at first when I was younger growing up, as everybody, we were told that the earth is round, and then Christopher Columbus, and no one wants to fall off the edge of the earth and everything like that. And later we learned that story's all a lie anyway, and that's all made up. And then we learned that, pretty much Christopher Columbus didn't think about that the world was round or anything like that. He wasn't the first one who got that. It was somebody else. And the whole history behind Christopher Columbus in and of itself is a whole nightmare as well. So anyway, just the things that we've been told, you got to go back further. It's kind of one of those things, you got to kind of go back to the beginning. Who said what first? When you look at the different types of societies out there, you have the different, you see the Sumerians, the Babylonians, you have the Egyptians, and in those points of view, they always believed that. Hold on one second. Okay, so what I was saying before was that in terms of I gotta get my trains out real quick. Okay, so what happens is that you have these things where the expanse and how God made the expanse and how he said these different things. So we learn the different stories and how these stories are not true. So you have to kind of go back to the beginning. In the beginning, it says God created the heavens and the earth. Boom. It answers that question where we came from. It answers the question, too, what happened that caused our situation to where we are. Because we're all related, and that's something that's very important. That means we're all a common ancestor to a common person. And that person, according to the Bible, is Adam and Eve. So, they always talk about who's the parent of who's the parent of who's the parent. You go backwards and you find Adam and Eve. Here's something here that's very interesting, too. That we all have this in nature. Now, the Bible talks about there's several different entities that are available in the scriptures. In the Garden of Eden, let's go from the beginning, you have the sea creatures, which are the fish. Then the next things he made, next living thing, the fish and the birds, right? Those are fish, birds. After the fish and the birds, he created the land animals and the creepy things, right? But before the birds and before the fish and before the creepy things and before he created us, there was another entity, talked about the serpent. And the serpent, before the serpent, they were the angels, right? Now, something interesting to note, the word stars are used interchangeably. Now, I have a lot of ideas I'm going through them, but the word stars are used interchangeably through the Bible, so we have the idea of stars and angels. And the Bible talks about the morning star, and the morning star is Lucifer. Lucifer is Satan. And so he became Satan after he fell. One of the things that was interesting about that is that he was in the garden, too. The Bible says in the book of Isaiah that Satan was also in the garden. He was one of the anointed cherubs he was one of those that covered the throne of God. He was above, So you have a situation where the you got the angels, you got the humans, you have God, you have the animals, you got the fish, you got the sea creatures, you got the land animals, you got us. And so God has told us things that we have not been able to see because we are unable to see things, So sometimes we had to be told. So when you come to different things, like in terms of science, for example, I've heard it said often, I've heard plenty of times from certain scientists or physicists that we are stardust. I've heard them say this. Now, I was talking to my wife just a little while before I started this video, and I said to myself, how do they know we're stardust? Well, they base it upon observation, of course. So they say, well, based on observation, we are stardust. So that's good to know, but has anybody ever gone to a star and taken like a little scoop of that star and then put that little scoop on a petri dish and looked it over and looked at it and cut it to little pieces and then put on little slides and then put it up there on the the little wall thing and then examine it and put it under a microscope and then look at it and then just give it to their friends and have it peer reviewed and go back and forth and back and forth and back. No, this is what you call, what's the word? Land of make believe. Yes, because what happens? How do they know we are star stuff? You'd have to come from a lot of presuppositions in order to get to that idea. Because, for example, we have never been to a star, nor could we ever go to a star. And quote unquote, if we're in this a heliocentric universe where the closest star that we have is our sun, we have nothing that goes to the sun that ever comes back from the sun, quote unquote. Because what happens is that you can't land a probe on the sun. Probably take readings, but how will you know what exactly it's made of? Because you can't take a little scoop of it and bring it back and examine it. Because remember that movie in Spider-Man where Dr. Octopus had the sun in his hand and he says, I have the power of the sun in the palm of my hand, right? He had that, and that was pretty interesting to be able to hear him say that. But the sad part was that he couldn't even touch it. He couldn't touch it because it would burn him. So the thing is that if the sun is like the sun that we see in the movies, then we can never touch it. Therefore, how do we even know what it's made of? Because we can't even get there to touch it, to examine it, to put it in a microscope, to look it over. So we just have the thing where we do an observation based upon observation. And so you can't tell how much my hands weigh by looking at them through the camera. You don't know how much, pretty much, what kind of rings I have on my finger by looking at them through the camera. You can make a speculation, but you won't know. You won't know if they're silver and gold. You won't know if they're bronze or pewter. You won't know any of that just by looking. You'd have to do some evaluation things that you'd have to actually figure out, and you wouldn't be able to know just by looking. You'd actually do more than that. You'd have to do more of a test. So anyway, so what happens is this. So when he talked about how we are stardust, or pretty much how we come from the Big Bang, or pretty much, there was another one, even gravity. Gravity is another one too. There's a big science called alchemy. You see the word alchemy? Initially it used to be called, actually it is called alchemy. Alchemy split into two words. One was chemistry, and the other one is alchemy. Now, what that means is that I use my mind, and my mind says, this object over here, I'm going to control it. So here, come here, object, come, and boom, I got you. And so I'm using my mind, or using some kind of force, magical force, to attract things to me. And so what happens, I'm able to keep you there like a magician, Let me bring one of my dinosaurs up. I'm going to attract you to me, and you're going to come to me because I'm using my force and my ability to create and pull you to me. However, the bottom line is that that's not the case. The case of the matter is, we're not 100% sure what keeps us here or on the earth or anything like that. As a matter of fact, the only way we can know for sure is if somebody told us who knew. Because everybody else who didn't know, there's a thing called a little speculation. Take the answer right before I get distracted. A little speculation type thing. And what happens is that you have to make a decision based on something that you don't know details about. So many times I have this phrase that I say to a lot of my friends whenever I just get tired of listening to them try and prove to me their scientific proof is absolute. I say, well, scientists don't really know for sure. Or scientists are not really sure. Or scientists don't really know for sure. They're not really sure. So that's one of the things. If you look at any peer book or any review, not saying that science is bad or science is evil. There's an aspect where when science tries to explain where we came from, apart from God, when God says in the beginning, God created heaven and the earth, that puts a really interesting connection right there, where it says, okay, you know what? Either I believe what man says, who doesn't have all the facts, because science, what it really means is just knowledge. Science means knowledge. So when I say science, I mean knowledge, the knowledge of man. The current knowledge of man, because the science that they had back in the day, the ones that built the pyramids, well, we don't have that science anymore, because we don't know how to do that. But the science that we have today, like for example, how to build certain things that, with the planned obsolescence that ends up breaking. So, for example, we build a computer, and the computer, instead of lasting forever, it lasts for a couple of years and then it breaks down. That way it keeps business and industry going, because if it doesn't ever break, then we'll have a situation there that people will lose jobs and things like that. So instead of keep the economy going, got to keep things breaking. So as for like the pyramids and stuff, that'll stay there forever and no one really maintains them because it's just there. because when people understood how to make stuff back then, they were much smarter than us today. Nevertheless, we are at the mercy of corporations and the elements and government. So anyway, so where do we get our truth from? We get our truth from, several sources. We get it from either we see it ourselves, we go and find out, or somebody else tells us, and we have to either believe what they say, or we have to find out the truth for ourselves. And so pretty much it's just a matter of belief. It comes down to a belief system. Now, the Bible has a lot of interesting things that it says, and one of the things it says about that which may be known of God, He made it known to us. And that's in Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1. It says God has revealed Himself to us. That everything that can be known about God has been revealed already. So what happens, you have a scenario where when people suppress the truth and unrighteousness, what they do, they take the Word of God, take things that are true, and they put a veil on it. So now you can't see it. So when people say, how do you know God exists? And you say, well, God made us, didn't He? Well, that's not proof enough. And I'll say, well, okay, what about the fact that we have a very complex DNA system? You say, well, science proved that to us. Yeah, but science didn't make our DNA. Science just says that we have a DNA, right? Just like many things in science. They don't explain why, they just explain what. So, for example, you can say, okay, a plane can fly. That's great. A plane can fly. And they said, that's a lot of science went into aerodynamics. Wonderful. But it's like, also fish can swim, And so, well, what about helium balloons? Helium balloons can fly too, and they don't use any of the aerodynamics that we are used to. I see light blinking, so I think I'm running out of time. I just want to say thank you so much for listening, and pretty much please like and subscribe to my page. I have more flat earth stuff I'm going to talk about more, but what I just want to tell you about is just please look at all the other stuff that I talked about as well. Remember, scientists don't really know for sure, but the Bible says God so loved us that He gave His only begotten Son. Whosoever believes in Him will not perish, but have everlasting life. Trust Jesus for eternal life. All right, thank you.